All right. Hello? Hello. If you're here for my BB8 without the, I'm getting, can you all hear me okay? Hello? Hello? Better? Better? Yeah, but I can hear it like right in my ear. All right, this is good? Yes, good. All right. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure there's going to be a few stragglers coming in. That's the problem when you schedule a panel right after dinner. So thank you all for coming. My name's Neumaier, and welcome to and this is my DroidCon, and welcome to BB8 without the printer. So I'll skip ahead here. So when I say BB8 without the printer, the droid you see in front of you has only one 3D printed part on him, which is the inner detail of his eye. Everything else is a casting, wood, or something else. And we'll be going over why I went with that method and how that was done. So a little bit about my background. I'm an aerospace engineer. I'm a graduate of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign with a master's in aerospace engineering with an emphasis on fluid mechanics and rocket propulsion. Exactly. I have been building model rockets since I was 11, and the one you see on the left here was my entry in the Team America Rocketry Challenge the first year they had it. And through years of building model rockets, I taught myself woodworking, painting, body work, and basically a lot of the craftsman tools I use today in a lot of my projects. So I grew up in Illinois, and I live in Huntsville now, so I'm part of the Alabama garrison. I've been living down there for, it'll be 10 years this February. And yes, I build, test, and manufacture rockets for a living. So I get a lot of questions about, like what was my first robot? Well, technically, it's these two. The one on the short one is called the Lunar Lander Test Bed, and it's a compressed air-powered vehicle that uses pulsing descent thrusters to test algorithms for landing on airless bodies like the moon and asteroids. It would fly for about 10 seconds to be a proof of concept, and it was so successful that we got permission to build its bigger sister, the warm gas tessaracle, which uses hydrogen peroxide and can fly for up to a minute and carry a lot of good instrumentation. So if you want to see some cool videos, look up Mighty Eagle on YouTube, and you'll see my girl flying around Marshall Space Flight Center. So when I started building rockets when I was 11, I thought, okay, I'm going to build rockets day and night. And when I got to college, I started to get a little burned out. Now, I love rockets, I love what I do for a living, but I needed another hobby for my creative outlet. I always loved Halloween, so I got started in prop building. And when I moved down to Huntsville and had more than $200 in my name for the first time, I started meeting a lot of people who were into the costuming or cosplay hobby or whatever you want to call it, and started learning from them and building bigger and bigger things and learning new skills along the way. Like the Big Daddy in the middle, I taught myself fiberglass working, and that drill does spin. The portal guns, I took electronics in school, but you never apply anything. Like, you do the math, but it's like you never actually learn to solder as part of your curriculum. So I taught myself to solder and apply Ohm's law and built the portal guns, which came in useful later for, like, I learned programming for my proton pack, and then I built a Apollo moon suit, which actually was purchased by the Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville. So I loved costuming, and I'm like, okay, where do I go up from here? And that's when I got into robotics. In 2011, I found out about this TV show, some of you might have heard of it, called Doctor Who. And I was going through pictures at DroidCon and I realized no one built a Dalek. I'm like, oh, this will go over really well if I build a full-size Dalek. And originally I was planning to sit in them, because that's how things go on in the TV show. And quickly realized I didn't want to sit in them because I fit, but it's a tight space. So I started reading the R2 Builders Club, because before I built the Dalek, I had no idea how any RC thing worked. Like, I had no idea how you make your radio control talk to a motor. And read the forums. There's a couple good forums on there with the KISS version of a drive system, where what's the bare minimum you need. And step by step learned to build a Dalek. So he actually just turned 6 years old today, because his first appearance was Con Castiberus in Huntsville, and that con is going on this weekend. A few years later, I've always wanted an R2-D2 since I was 8 years old, and I didn't even see the movie till I was 12. So I started, when I heard the announcement there were going to be new Star Wars movies, I'm like, I want to do the trooping. I want to be the guy who's taking, the R2-D2 to the hospitals and stuff. So I started acquiring the parts. So I got the 300 millimeter dome. I got this. We cut the Cena frame. We did the, print the pattern for the skins out at Kinko's and hand cut them. And in about 4 months, I built Goddard here. I name all my droids after aerospace figures, so the Dalek's name is Braun, and R2-D2's Goddard, and here he's in an interesting picture because my friend wanted him for her prom pictures. I didn't get to go to prom, and he got a prom date, so the droid's living better than I do. So I built R2. I started cutting the dome, and this is true, I started cutting the dome the day the teaser trailer for Force Awakens came out, because that was like the big click of, full-on fanboy, I'm excited about Star Wars again, because there was a pretty good lull there. And which meant, by the time Goddard made his first appearance in about May of 2015, the world was just introduced to BB8. So everywhere I took Goddard, the reaction was something like this. Oh, he's really cool. Are you building BB8? Is someone building BB8? Is BB8 possible? I heard BB8's a practical effect. BB8, BB8, and I didn't want to build BB8 right away because I had just finished a $4,000 robot. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to hold off for a few years till, kinks get worked out and whatnot, give Goddard time to troop. Well, things started falling into place. My friend Diane Valdez got a brand new 3D printer and decided to play around with it by printing the dome that was available on the BB8 Builders Club and gave it to me for my birthday. Because she knew that if she handed me the dome, I'm the kind of person that I'm not going to let it sit. I'm going to finish the dome. So it's like, thanks a lot. Then the club identified the California Quality Plastic Spheres and started doing a run on them. So I decided, okay, well, I better pick one up now, because in a few years, there might be a waiting list. And they also had the Plan B decals by Corey Pacquione available, so I picked up a sheet too. So by Christmas, so literally the week before the movie came out, I had everything for the exterior of BB8 sitting in my living room. Now the other thing that kind of pushed me to build BB8 was I expected there would be a bunch of 3D printed rolling BB8s within, an army of them before the movie, because it seemed like the progress on the head was going super fast and people were doing the panels. And the forum was, almost every single post was arguing about printer settings and showing the dome. And I couldn't find anything about what was happening in the drive system. There was Corey's drive, there was Ed's drive, Kurt Zimmerman had one in his Christmas card the previous year, which is nuts. And I'm trying to find anybody arguing about the physics. Like, how do you actually make this work? And I couldn't find those discussions. And I took that as a challenge of, I can make this work. So when I decided to build Weir, I had a few requirements I laid out. So kind of going back to my R2-D2, when I built R2-D2, you know, some of the droids here are amazing. They have opening panels, they have stun guns. You know, I've seen droids that do the 3-2-3, I've seen droids that walk. I really just want these things to function. So like Goddard, he rolls around, his head turns, he has blinky lights, he plays music. That's all I need him to do. Because when you take him to the children's hospital, the kid is still going to give him a hug. And I need the time and money to work on other projects. So Weir, my main requirement was he had to be able to roll. With all my projects, I need them to run for 6 to 8 hours, so a full troop day. And I picked that number because about 8 hours is when my battery runs out and I need a sandwich. Now the other thing is I grew up with woodworking. So with rocketry, and my dad was a carpenter, I always used woodworking machines. I never learned how to use like a metal mill or a lathe or anything. And in the past, I've always had to get, you know, like one of our technicians at work to owe me a favor or something to get a part made. And I'm like, I really want to make as much of this as I humanly can in my garage. Other than that, I was like, he has to be ready for DroidCon. That's going to be his premiere. Because I heard that Brian Hearing and Dave Chapman, the puppeteers for BB8, were going to be there, and I wanted him to be able to roll there. Now, I also was looking at, you know, doing the head tilt so he could bow, you know, and like nod yes and no, because that's a feature you don't get on R2-D2. And in terms of airplanes, you have 3 axes. You have pitch, which is up and down, roll, side to side, and then yaw, which is like left and right. I wanted to have them stabilized. Roll was a requirement, but pitch was a requirement. Roll was desired, but eventually I left it off in order to make my deadline. So the big question, why didn't I print the droid? The droid started construction in January of 2016, so literally 2 weeks after the movie came out. At this time, I didn't own a 3D printer, and I hadn't modeled anything in a 3D program. And part of the reason is because most projects, I would try to decide, okay, do I need to print it, or do I know the way to do it with the knowledge and tools I have now? Like, how many science experiments do I have to put in this project? And I realized that the 3D printer was going to cost me, you know, the investment of the printer, the learning curve of materials, the learning curve of modeling, slicers, everything. And most friends I know, they spend more time arguing, fighting the printer than fighting what they're trying to make with the printer. So I'm like, I don't want to deal with that. I want to fight and make BB8 work. I don't want to fight making a printer work. The other factor was budget, because my favorite movie is The Martian, and that came out a few months before The Force Awakens. So part of the reason I didn't want to make BB8 was because I was already knee-deep in the Mark Watney suit. In fact, some of you might see my car outside. My license plate is Watney. So I decided, okay, BB8 is going to be non-printed. He is going to be made with tools I have access to now. So where did we start? I had a 3D print. So again, my friend Diane gave me the 3D printed dome. It was ABS, but it had some problems. First off, it was peeling in several spots. So over time, I was worried it was going to delaminate. The other problem was it was surprisingly heavy. And for BB8, because of the physics, you need all the weight to be as low as possible, which means the head has to be light. It also has to survive a whole crap load of abuse, of, you know, falling off the droid, especially, you know, when you're prototyping this thing, the head is going to fall off at some point. It's always going to fall off no matter what you do. So I went ahead and finished it. I basically sanded it smooth, filler primer, Bondo, got all the lines out, and I made it into the shape I wanted it to and the smoothness level I needed it to be. The next step was to make a mold. So I used Rebound 25 brush-on rubber, and over the course of a week, made a silicone mold of the head and the neck ring, and cast this in fiberglass. So the materials I use, which after this panel, I'm going to be opening the droid, and I have a sample of the fiberglass on the table over there. So please come by, and we'll do the whole show and tell so you can get a closer look. So the material I use is 2 layers. These are all available from Smooth On. I use 2 layers of epoxy coat. It comes in 3 colors, so the dome on Weir is a red epoxy coat, but I use gray now in case paint chips off. 2 layers of epoxy coat. Freeform Air is a very lightweight, it weighs next to nothing, epoxy putty. You put that in the sharp corners because the fat fiber doesn't want to get in there, and that makes weak spots. So you fill all the weak spots with putty, and then you layer it with glass cloth and epoximite resin. And it makes a very strong and very lightweight casting. If I had a little more time, I would have made a demo head to stand on, but I didn't have time to test it first, so we're not going to do that demo this time. If I do it, I'll post a video somewhere. And then as far as finishing the dome, I used the 4 magnets. The outer ones do a 65-pound pull. The inner one does like 100 and something. And then it's using Teflon ball roller bearings. Now, because I knew the ball was going to be closed, I knew the sound system had to be in the head. And the way I went with that is I didn't want to have to like find an amp and find a battery and find a speaker. I wanted like quick and dirty. So I found a clip speaker at Best Buy, which has Bluetooth. So I literally just made a mount and put that in the head. So head was pretty straightforward. So the body. So with any BB8 builder, because anybody looking to build a BB8, you're going to run into this conundrum. Do you do the pendulum, which is, or the axle drive, which is you have one pivot point that goes through the middle of the ball with a suspended weight, and you turn by leaning the weight, or having a flywheel that turns the whole body. That's actually how they did the droid at Celebration, which is actually the drive system you see on the right. And it's closer to how the puppet works because the puppet has an axle through it. So to be as close to how BB8 works in the film, that's how you would go. The other option is how they did the Sphero droids, which is a hamster, which is basically, think of a remote control car inside a hamster ball. That's what you have. So fun fact about this picture on the right. I'm sure everybody saw when Sphero came out, everyone was buying them and making a YouTube video of we're going to Dremel it and see what the inside looks like, because, you know, apparently we needed 500 of those. I work for an aerospace company, so we have industrial x-ray equipment. So we x-rayed my Sphero. So we got the picture of the inside and it still works. So yay, connections. So the pendulum gives you a little more freedom of what you can do, and the ball ends up being a bit more forgiving because you don't have to worry about the whole inside being smooth. Like I think every other droid here is a pendulum drive. The reason I went with the hamster drive is the big unknown was how well the paint's going to hold up on the ball. And because if you said before BB8, you're going to build a project where you're painting the wheel, everyone would look at you like you're nuts. So the thing is, there was no data. There was no similar project to look at, like, is the paint going to stay on? Is it going to pick up a bunch of dirt? How well does it scratch? There just was no information. So I decided Weir was going to be a hamster drive because I wanted to get the ball to get weathered around the entire surface. Because if he was an axle and the paint was weak, what would happen is he's going to start wearing a tire tread, and you're going to see exactly he is a axle droid. So the next step was, what do I build Weir around? And like I said, I didn't want to have to get anything 3D printed. I didn't want to have to get anything machined. So I wanted to find a motor that was strong enough to move him that I could just pop a wheel on and mount it to my structure. And after going through several robot websites, going through forums, I settled on the NPC 2122, which is actually one of the R2 favorites. And the reason I went with it is because it has an excellent torque value. It's 12 volts, and a 4-inch Coulson wheel will go right on that axle with a keyed 1/8-inch bar so that it turns the wheel. So once I had that, that was the power plant for Weir. As far as power, I'm still a little sketchy on lithium ions and lipos and all those, because simply I just haven't worked with them yet. And I took a UAV class at work, and they have that montage video of every hobbyist car on fire because they charged the battery wrong. And I decided to go with the steel lead acids because I've used them in the past on both Braun and Goddard. And then the other factor was I already had all the charging equipment for Goddard, so both droids could use the exact same charging equipment. And also those batteries, because they're heavy, they're good ballast. So 3D modeling, I learned Inventor 7 in college, but I hadn't used it since I was a freshman. So it's been years, and I didn't want to end up screaming at a computer for this. So most of my every project you ever seen me do, I use sketch paper. I literally just go through with sketch paper, a pencil, a calculator, a ruler, and a compass and protractor, and I figure out all my angles that way. I love doing math on projects. But to make sure everything fit in the ball before I started buying the 100, I think each of those motors is like 167 bucks. I wanted to verify things were going to actually fit in the ball. And what I would do is I would take spare MDF and actually build a few mock-ups and lay it in, and that gave me a good hands-on, okay, does this fit? Does it work? So like what you see on the right, I actually was looking at using a third motor for roll stability, but then like building this mock-up, I could see, well, the droid can't turn then because that's going to be torquing against the ball. So using the actual mock-ups was a great way to see what would work, because I've seen the best CAD programs. I'm even dealing with this at work where you'll have the best CAD programs and we have like really talented designers, and then you go put the thing together and it's like, well, the bolt physically can't go through this flange. So after a few mock-ups, I ended up going through 2 drive systems with Weir. So the first one, I put the motors up a little bit higher so that I could suspend all my weight to the bottom, which would let me put the center of mass as low as I humanly could with dumbbells. What I found out with this drive system was when the wheels are mounted high with the ball, if you look at how the net force works with what's tangent and what's perpendicular to the sphere, it forces the sphere apart. So anytime the seam is vertical, it's trying to split itself open. So what I ended up resolving that problem with is I built the second version, which is actually what's in Weir, and put the motors as low as possible so that their wheels are as far down as possible. And because now the net force is pointed almost straight down, it's not splitting the ball anymore. Plus it lowered the, with the gear ratio and everything on the ball, it lowered its speed. It actually gave it more torque and made stability actually a lot better. So then I finally had my drive system for what was going into Weir. General schematic, it's about the same as an R2-D2. the one big difference is I have to have an Arduino with an IMU to run stability. So it actually has to measure what his angle is and my receiver output to figure out what to give the motors. We'll get more into that a little bit later. As far as what's driving the motors, it's a Sabertooth, I think that's a 235. So it's the exact same thing I have in my R2D2. The head mast, so I showed the picture earlier where I have the magnets and the roller balls on the top. There's a matching set inside the ball that rides on the inside of the ball. So that's where you hear a lot of the clicking. And the mast has a servo so that I can move his head to the left and right so he can strafe, because otherwise he's always going to be rolling in the direction his head's pointed. You'll notice that green sponge, and the reason that's there is the California sphere, at least the one I have, is 1 inch taller than it is wide. So it's not a perfect sphere. It's indistinguishable to the naked eye, but once you have a rigid item inside, you definitely see it. So that sponge helps compensate for the constant changing diameter of the ball. So there's a few videos on YouTube when I'm test driving and you'll see it's going up and down, up and down, up and down. And the magnets actually hold it to the ball, but you need that there so that when you put the head on, it's at least up there so the magnets can grab it. The sound system, I'm using a basically same idea used in most R2D2s. So I have my 12-channel remote, which is the thing all the way on the left. And in the middle there is a SparkFun wave trigger. And the reason I use the wave trigger over the MP3 is it's polyphonic, so I can play music and beep at the same time. This is going to be very handy later if I ever get him to do the thing where he can roll and make it sound like he has the coins on the inside from The Last Jedi. Now obviously I can't run a cable to a speaker like you would do on R2D2, so I have a Bluetooth transmitter that's actually synced up to my Bluetooth speaker in the head. So all the sound stuff is actually contained in the Droid. It just has to have the one transmitter to talk to the head. Now, stability hardware, there's 2 items here that I don't have on an R2D2 or the Dalek. So I have a BN055 IMU, and what that little chip does is it measures the Droid's angle in all 3 axes. That sends a signal via serial to a Spark. I started with a SparkFun Red board, and it worked for about 6 months, but then it forgot the code, so I had to re-upload it. So I swapped to an Arduino, actual brand name Arduino Uno, and I haven't had a problem since. Now, you always hear like, oh, I don't know how, like earlier, the gentleman with the Droid that had all the panels that open up and the stun gun, he mentioned like he's not a coder. My 2 worst subjects in school were control theory and computer programming. And I had to learn how to program a control loop into an Arduino. And the way I did that was I actually started with the Moron's Guide to Arduino and how do you make the LED light up? How do you make the LED blink? How do you make the Arduino talk to a servo? How do you make it read a servo? And work my way up and read a lot how James Burton, ex-Robots UK, he put the code out for his stability loop for his version 2 Droid, and I used that as a skeleton, because this is, again, the first thing I ever programmed. Now, if you're wondering what that's like, I don't have sound, but I actually have a video I recorded of the process. So some of you have heard a little joke I make about, well, working on BB8 did a better job, working on Weird did a better job of making me Kylo Ren than him BB8. That's not all that much a lie. That's actually how I got my 501st number. So after all the troubleshooting, after all the mock-ups and test drives and everything, which was about a 5-month process, it was time to finally paint Weir. And the painting method I went with is, the domes start off clear. I sanded them to 200 grit, wet sanded them with rubbing alcohol to 400, and then painted them white with Krylon Fusion paint, which is a paint specifically meant to bond the plastic. I let that cure for a solid week before I touched it. And then I applied Corey's Plan B decals. The files are on the club wiki. They're basically automotive vinyl. And then I weathered the Droid with cheap acrylic paints. So overall, it took about a week and 2 days to just weather him. So again, I was worried about how much that paint job was going to hold. This is actually his birthday today. He's 2 years old. His first appearance was at Magic City Con in Birmingham in 2016, which is actually going on right now. So today is actually Weir's birthday. So miles on the ball. So Weir started going out in about 2016, and again, he was a science experiment. We didn't know how well is the paint going to hold up. Can I drive him in a convention setting? Can he drive on tile? He's been to 12 different conventions. He's been to a children's hospital. He's been a ring bearer. So he's been getting around, and the paint job's been holding up remarkably well. He's gotten a lot of good attention. He met Brian Hearing and Dave Chapman at DroidCon, so he got to be the BB8 at the con when they did their interview. And then at Star Wars Celebration, which is probably the coolest thing I've done with a robot, other than the children's hospital stuff, is Lucasfilm filmed the droid for the cold open for the closing ceremonies. So if you see the closing ceremony for Celebration Orlando, you'll see a little Ray come up and BB-8 gives her a badge and then it says Lucasfilm. That's this droid. So it's like, I made it into a Lucasfilm production. So the droid has actually been working remarkably well. He's pretty stable when you drive. There's a learning curve. And overall, I think I did pretty well. And like I said, there's no printed parts in them. Now, I don't hate 3D printing. In fact, I finally gave in and bought a CR10 because I realized there are projects, 3D printing is a tool, and at some point you are going to have projects that have to have it. Like one of my goal projects in the future is I want to do a Mars rover that I can take to schools and demonstrate the rocker boogie concept. That's going to require a level of precision I can't do with a Dremel and a palm sander. So I finally gave in and started learning. So this is actually one of my first projects. I was obsessed with the Rocketeer when I was 7 years old, which is actually probably why I'm sitting here today. And yeah, I've learned the 3D modeling. I use Fusion 360. I'm using Simplify 3D. And the reason I want to stress this is because remember when I said there would be a development time and learning curve? If I tried to build Weir as a printed droid back in 2016, it would have cost me, based on this, it would have cost me about 2 months of research, at least a month of a learning curve, and my printer with enclosure is pushing almost $1,000 to $1,500. So it would have been an investment that I just didn't have at the moment. And part of the reason I really didn't want to do Weir printed is because eventually I would like to be able to put plans out, and I know not everybody is going to have a printer, because some people are going to want to build BB-8 and not build anything else, and they don't need to go buy a $1,000 printer. So moving forward on Weir, my big thing with Weir is I've always wanted to go back and give him his roll stability, which is going to require me to basically redesign his drive system to put a pendulum on the inside. I kind of want to still keep him a hamster. I know there's some excellent BB-8s here that, because they're 3D printed, they can have the lights in the ball, they have the texture, but when I brought up with my friends about upgrading Weir or replacing him with a 3D thing, I'm very sentimental. And he's got 2 years of stories. He was first at DroidCon. He was in Celebration. So like the little girl, we just love Weir as he is. So that's about it. So here's my droids. Again, I'm originally from Chicago, so we're all excited about Celebration is going to Chicago. I'm on the forums. My handle is Dark Jedi 1500. I very rarely post there. So if you want to get a hold of me, the best bet is Facebook or Instagram. Again, you can just find me as Wayne Neumaier. I guess we're all friends here now. But I also have on Instagram, I go by A7L Props. I also have an artist page on Facebook. So I hope you found that informative, and I'll take any questions. Thank you. Yes?
So, do you know anybody else that's done the acrylic dome?
So first off, the question was, do I know anyone else who's done the acrylic dome? You don't want acrylic. You want polycarbonate because acrylic cracks. The main difference is polycarbonate is stronger, so like that's why safety glasses are made out of it. It's more impact resistant, but optically acrylic's the better one. So like I actually have a ocular implant in my eye. It's a long story, but that's acrylic because it has to be optically clear. Otherwise it's going to get cloudy over years of UV radiation and whatnot. But with if you went with acrylic, because some people made this mistake and they bought acrylic from the company, California, and what happened is they tried to drill the pin in and the whole thing just shattered. So back in 2016, everybody and their twin was basically trying to do the ED drive with the hemispheres. So I know Corey Pacquion has this set up with the polycarbonate sphere. The ED drive has the sphere. And I know at least 2 other people at Celebration Orlando had the sphere set up with the polycarbonate. You're starting to see it go away a bit because of the 3D printed files. But yeah, there are a few out there with this setup, and the Plan B decals are still on the wiki, and there's actually a whole how-to guide with those decals about how to apply them and weather.
So a little bit of a follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
You all end up with pretty much the same kind of drive system then, as far as how you get your hamster drive?
The only other hamster, so as far as hamster drives, there's Corey's, which I've only seen like one picture of it, and it's kind of the same where you have the 2 motors and the dumbbells, but because there aren't a lot of pictures of the inside, I can't tell you like what motor it was. And then the other popular hamster design, yeah, I don't see the girls here. There's a BB8 out in the hall that's done with like a screw-on panel, and it basically has 2 wheels, kind of like that, and the, what do you call them? The Omni wheels on the inside. So I've seen a few people do that. I forget the gentleman's, anybody know the gentleman's name? Yeah, so there's a few hamsters out there. Like YouTube, you'll see a lot of them. But again, a lot of people are trying to do the axle ones because that's what's in the movie. So it's kind of a pick your poison thing. Because like with the hamster, I'm going to have a harder time making the head lean because of the way it moves, and the motors are going to have to catch up, and doing the side-to-side wobbles, so there are limits. But like I said, I prefer the hamster because I don't want to be replacing panels and having to repaint that globe all the time. All right, any more? All right, well, I'll get Weir over to the table over there, and I'll open them up so you can all see the inside. Thank you.